Hey y'all, hope you're doing well. My name is Dave. I'm a senior in the class of 2021 at Walter Johnson High School in North Bethesda, Maryland. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Maryland's General Assembly, which is what we call our legislature. So who are they? So obviously the General Assembly is the legislative body. They represent Maryland as a whole. So it's our state government. Their job is to pass public laws, raise and spend tax money, and oversee the operation of the state's executive agencies. So it's a bicameral legislature, just like the U.S. Congress. It's divided into two houses. We have the Senate, and we have the House of Delegates. The House of Delegates is obviously going to be bigger. Their power comes from our state constitution, which is significantly longer and more in-depth than the U.S. Constitution. It's got a lot of weird subsections, like an entire article about Baltimore City specifically. And obviously they are to check the power of the executive branch. So it's their responsibility to directly elect the treasurer. They have to confirm all major executive appointments, and they have the ability to overturn the governor's vetoes. So how are they made up? So the state is divided into 47 legislative districts. I'll show you a map in a second. So each of these districts, they elect one senator and 3 delegates who serve 4-year terms in years when we elect the governor. So in 2022 and 2026 and whatnot, it's every 4 years. In even numbered years when we don't have a presidential race. Some districts are going to subdivide their delegations. So within their Senate district, they might have 3 1-delegate districts, or they might have a 2-member district and a 1-member district. And you're going to see this more out in rural areas. And then, so once they're elected, the Senate's led by a president, the House is led by a speaker. All elected delegates have to be 21 years old. Senators must be 25 years old. They have to have lived in Maryland for a year and in their district for 6 months, and obviously be a U.S. citizen. They can't be a member of U.S. Congress or active military personnel, which is pretty normal. There are not any term limits. So currently we have a Democratic supermajority, which means we have at least the 3/5 majority that you need to do most things with overturning vetoes and checking powers and whatnot. And the salary that they make, it's determined by an independent commission, so they don't get to set their own salaries. So here's a look at the delegate map, which is very confusing. I'll show you a cleaner map of the Senate. But as you can see, obviously the red areas on Eastern Shore and out west are more rural. These rural areas are more likely to divide their Senate districts into smaller delegate districts to get more direct representation, but it also lowers the voting power of people. Because, if there's 3 delegates from one district, then you get to vote for 3 delegates. If there's only 1 in your district, then you only get to vote for 1 person. So obviously, you can see around DC and around Baltimore, that's where the Democrats have a ton of their influence. And then as you get to more rural areas, it's the Republicans. But there's obviously just so many more people around DC and around Baltimore that we get the Democratic supermajority. And then so we do redistricting every 10 years. It's 2 years after the census. The next one's in 2022. And it happens at the same time as county governments redistrict and, the federal government redistrict. And so the way this happens is, so the governor on the first day before the session starts, the governor will bring a proposal to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. And if the 2 houses can't agree on a different plan within the first 45 days, then the governor's plan is what goes into law. And so here's a more clear map without all the weird colors. You can clearly just see all the Democrats, around DC, around Baltimore, in the middle of the state there, and then all around the edges, it's very Republican, it's very conservative areas out there. Okay, so the General Assembly, they meet in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, which is right up there on the Chesapeake Bay. It's an old ancient port city. Our state capital, I believe the Capitol building is the longest and continuous legislative use in the country. So it's very small and it doesn't quite fit all the people, but we cram them in there anyways. So they meet for one continuous 90-day period from January to March. We call this the session. And it can be extended by up to 30 days if you get a 3/5 majority in both chambers, or the governor could call an extraordinary session at another time of up to 30 days, which they don't get any extra money for. But generally this doesn't happen. And so generally you only have the 90 days, sometimes less, very rarely less, but you only really have the 90 days And so it's a very, very chaotic 90 days. You have to get your bills in usually ahead of time. You can bring in bills, but usually you want to get them out there ahead of time. It's going to be just constant motion every single day of those 90 days. It is pure chaos in Annapolis. It is the legislature, they just don't have the time. And so they're going to do a lot of deliberating very fast, which is not necessarily great because we don't have a full-time legislature. And I'll talk more about that later. I'll show you a couple of maps. But yeah, it's about the most chaotic period of time you'll ever see. The General Assembly, in the Constitution, they have a necessary and proper clause, which says they can create all laws that are necessary and proper to carry out their duties, which is, just a big clause. It lets them do just about what they want. So like I said, the House is led by a speaker, the Senate's led by a president. These people, they're going to preside over the sessions and they're going to appoint committee members. So they got a lot of power. This is just like the U.S. Congress. But then behind the scenes, the Department of Legislative Services, which is like the legislature's employees, it's not like elected people. They're going to be doing like the actual work. They're going to like write the legislation. They're going to analyze the legislation. They're going to tell delegates like, who believes what and what it's going to do, and basically help them formulate their opinions a lot. And you'll see this in every legislative body. Your elected officials are not going out there and reading and writing the bills themselves. It's always staffers doing that behind the scenes for them. So committees. So the General Assembly, it's divided into standing committees, statutory committees, special committees, and select committees. So standing committees always stick around. Statutory is kind of for like rules and laws. Special committees are going to be like a temporary committee, and it's going to dissolve after it's done like a specific purpose. And then select committees are local delegations. So it's all the people who represent a county or even a part of a county. So like everybody, all the delegates from Montgomery County are one select committee, and this happens for every county in the state. So the standing committees are the ones that matter. They have a bunch of jobs. So they do public hearings on all of their assigned legislation, including they hear testimony from you. This is where really the debating on the laws goes down. Most bills won't make it out of committee. Most bills will not be actually voted on the floor. Standing committees will also review the governor's nominations. They will hear discussion on the budgets of specific state government units. They will receive proposed amendments for all the legislation that they're supposed to deal with, and eventually they're going to vote to approve or reject the legislation, which does not pass it into law. It means it makes it out of committee, and then it goes to an actual debate on the floor, and then it gets voted on. And I won't list off what the specific committees are, but they're pretty much the same committees as the U.S. Senate has. So there's going to be stuff for judiciary and stuff for education and stuff for, all those things. Special, they have a general topic, and all the legislation that fits into that general topic is going to come through them. Okay, so how does legislation work? So there's a calendar that's prepared ahead of time, and it's all the items that we're going to consider during the floor session for the day. And we pretty much meet every weekday. Sometimes we're going to add in night sessions, sometimes we're going to add in weekend sessions, but usually it's going to be Monday through Friday. And they post their schedule online. It's very easy to find out what's going on. So the actual process is the Department of Legislative Services, they'll help draft the bill. And then it's read for the first time in its entirety on the floor. They have to read out every word of the bill. So then it's going to go to a committee hearing where there's testimony. Any amendments that are needed will be voted on there. And then, the committee votes as a whole on whether or not they want to pass the bill. And if it makes it out of there, they have our second reading on the floor. And now people who are not in the committee, they can make amendments on the bill. And again, if it's a bill that's passed one chamber and gone to the other, that's when members can make amendments on it as well. And so once we've voted on these amendments, we print it up for third reading. You have to print it up. You have to have the full finalized copy of it. And then we have a final action vote, which pretty much every bill is just a simple majority. Any amendments on the bills or constitutional amendments or emergency action, it requires a 3/5 supermajority. And these three readings have to happen, according to the Constitution, they have to happen on 3 different days. But if you get a 2/3 majority, you can override these 3 different days. But you still have to have it, you can do it on the same day, but you still have to have it printed in its final form for third reading before you can vote on it. Or with unanimous consent, which means every single person in the legislature in that house agrees, you can do all three readings simultaneously. But if there's a single person who says no, then it doesn't work. So now we've passed a bill in one chamber. Now it goes to the other chamber. If it passes in that chamber with no amendment, it's going to go to the governor's desk. If it's passed in the second chamber with an amendment, it comes back to the first chamber. And if they accept the amendments, it goes to the governor's desk. If they don't accept it, then we're going to have a joint committee between the two chambers that's going to make recommendations on the bill, that then both chambers have to pass it. And then once it winds up on the governor's desk, all bills have to be presented to the governor within 20 days at the end of session. And the governor then gets 30 days to act on it before it becomes a law. They cannot veto the budget bill or any constitutional amendments, and I'll talk more about the budget in a different video. But all other legislation can be vetoed, and it could be overridden by a 3/5 supermajority in both houses, which again, the Democrats have, and they're not expecting to lose that. And then pretty much all regular bills, unless they specify otherwise, go into law on June 1st. Which is about 3 months after the end of session. If they're emergency bills, they'll go into effect on the day that they're signed. Okay, so why might a legislature not be in office? They could die, obviously. They could resign. They could become disqualified for some reason. They could refuse to act on something. They could be expelled from the chamber. Or they could be removed in some way from the city or county which they were elected, like they're banned from re-entering Baltimore City or whatever. Either chamber can choose to expel a member as long as they have 2/3 majority within the chamber. And then their seats, no matter when they're gone, their seats are going to be filled by a governor's appointment. And they also have the power to impeach any any member of the executive and the judiciary branch. So the House of Delegates votes to impeach, and then the Senate's going to try, and they have to have a 2/3 majority to convict and get them removed from office. But there's some weird special restrictions written into the Constitution. So during the session, during our 90 days, neither chamber can leave for more than 3 days unless 2/3 of their members vote to approve it, or unless the other chamber says with a majority, yes, you can do that. Again, without a 2/3 majority, you cannot introduce a new bill in the last 35 days of session, which is an effort to, it's already so chaotic, you don't have time to get through a bill in the last 35 days, so nothing new comes in unless it's really, really important. Your bills are really supposed to embrace one and only one subject. This doesn't always happen, but it pretty much has to, which is even more helpful because then your bills will be shorter, which is good because they have to be read out in their entirety on the floor. The state is not allowed to take on debt. The only time we can take on debt is for infrastructure projects. Otherwise, the budget has to be completely balanced. Again, I made another video on that. Then the legislature has the power to govern elections, but it has to do so within the constraints of the Constitution. The Constitution has multiple articles, especially the first article, that just talk about elections and the process for elections and ensuring that we're going to have fair and free elections. And then an elected official who's convicted of a crime is going to get kicked out of their seat. And they can also lose their seat if they don't create just a clean, proper financial report that talks about all of the money that they made during the year. So really, you have to be very careful and make sure that you're staying completely legal, and you have to be within the constraints of the law. You have to be a good citizen, or else you're going to lose your seat. So anything that the General Assembly passes, it can be petitioned to submit for vote or referendum, just like happens in Montgomery County. It needs a petition to be signed by 3% of the qualified voters in the state. We count qualified voters as the people who voted in the last governor's election. And no more than half of those 3% can come from any individual county or city. So according to our numbers from 2018, this means you need almost 70,000 valid signatures, which is not going to happen. It has never happened. It probably never will. You get about 3 months. You have to get it in before June 1st. Usually things don't get passed till towards the end of session. So you're not going to have too long to file those 70,000 signatures. So you have to get them really fast, which is very hard to do. And if it's a law that pertains to like a specific county or city, like we are going to build this or we're going to treat people this way in Garrett County, then you need 10%. The signatures have to be 10% of the qualified voters from that specific county or city. So when we pass constitutional amendments, so bills that require one, they have to have a 3/5 majority in both houses. And the governor does not get to veto these, but once they're passed, he makes sure that they get printed in a bunch of newspapers, so people can know what's happening. This is less relevant today. It's an old, kind of more outdated law, but it's still important to make sure people know what they're voting on because the people vote on them. Every year at the next general election, they go to a voter referendum. And a majority of voters have to adopt them before they'll actually become law. And if it affects specifically one city or county, then it has to pass by a majority in the state as well as in that location. And you can also do temporary amendments, which are called provisions of limited duration. Generally, we don't do those, though. So generally, constitutional amendments, they do happen fairly regularly. There'll often be, 2 or 3 on the ballot every couple of years when we have our regular general elections. And then every 20 years, we're required by the Constitution to have a vote on whether or not we should call a constitutional convention. So our next vote's going to be in 2030. And then if the voters decide they want one, the General Assembly will provide by law for the creation of one at its next session. We're going to elect delegates to it that will equal the representation people have in the houses. So currently, it's 141 delegates plus 47 senators, 47 senators. So 188 delegates at the convention. Again, from, elected from your territory. So if I have a senator and 3 delegates, then I get to elect 4 delegates. And then any changes that they make to this constitution, like if they're writing a whole new constitution, this again goes to a referendum, and the majority of voters have to approve it. And so constitutional conventions, we tried, like in 2010, the laws are weird on how you can call one because a majority of voters who voted on whether or not we should have a constitutional convention said we should have one, but it wasn't a majority of the voters who voted in the election. And so it did not pass. So in general, it's not super easy to call one, but it's not exactly infeasible either because there are generally people who would like to see it happen. So our Constitution itself, we are currently on our 4th Constitution. It has been generally this Constitution, obviously with amendments since 1867. It starts with a big Declaration of Rights, and it has 19 different articles. Which are going to talk about all kinds of topics. So we have obviously articles from the branches of government that are very broad. Then we have some very specific details about Baltimore City, specifically Baltimore City. It is an entire article about Baltimore City. There are also entire articles about like gambling and other very specific topics. I'm not quite sure why, but it's a very long, elaborate constitution, not as long necessarily as like county charters, but certainly a lot longer than the U.S. Constitution. So how do you interact with the legislature? So during committee sessions, you can go in, you can testify on the bills in Annapolis. Now, check the calendar first, but then you get to go there, you sign up, you go in, you talk about what you think on the bill. The committee will consider it. You can also reach out to your state legislators. A lot of them want to be very responsive. They want to get their names out there because they need your votes. And it's very hard to make a big name for yourself as a state legislator. Because, national politicians and local politicians are both more community accessible, but state politicians, nobody really knows what's going on too well. And so they really want to help you to make sure they've got your vote and your support and you like them. Also, obviously, writing emails and letters to them is very helpful if you don't want to go there and talk to them in person. And then Maryland has an open door law for their legislature, which says like when the legislature is meeting, the doors will be open. And you will walk in there, you will be able to walk in there and you'll be able to watch the proceedings. If you're unruly, they can have you thrown in jail. But all of the meetings are open to the public. You go in there, you sit up on the balcony and you watch the proceedings if you want. Okay, so here's some comparisons. So how does our legislature compare to a couple other states? So here's a map of how much you get paid. Where Maryland's legislature is getting paid a lot more than most legislatures. we're not getting paid exactly enough. We're not getting paid quite a living wage for an annual salary because we only meet for the 3 months. And so you have to have another job the rest of the year, which is kind of hard for a lot of people to do. So our legislature tends to be filled up with lawyers who can step away for 3 months. But not a lot of jobs will let you step away for the 3 months and then come back for the other 9 months of the year. And then here's another look at like when state legislatures meet, which is my calculation of how many days I expect them to actually meet to pass legislation during a year. And so you can see, obviously, Maryland's higher on this list, but not too high. There's a lot of full-time or pretty much full-time legislatures, which Maryland is not up there for. Could it stand to be? Yes, we could definitely use full-time governing because the governor kind of gets to run the show. The governor and the Board of Public Works, they kind of get to run the show for 9 months out of the year when the legislature is not in session. And there's only a few restrictions on what they can do while the legislature is not in session. And the legislature isn't there to check their power, which is not good. So it could stand to be higher, but Maryland is also a lot better than many states in terms of meeting regularly. So thanks for watching. Here's a list of the links you can come look at. If you'd like to see my sources or if you'd like to do your own research on this, that'd be fantastic. Feel free to shoot me an email, davetalkslocalpolitics@gmail.com. I'd be happy to talk with you more. I hope everything was clear in this video. If not, try and let me know, and I think I can provide some more explanations. But yeah, thanks for watching. Continue on down in this video if you want to hear more about Maryland's government and Montgomery County's government, and have a great day.